The Mediterranean Sea has a particular quality of light in the late afternoon that does not exist anywhere else on Earth. It comes from the angle of the sun against the water, from the whiteness of the haze that sits permanently on the southern horizon, from the way the surface catches and scatters the light, so that the entire sea seems to glow from within rather than reflect from above. Sailors who have spent time in these waters remember that light the way they remember port calls and storms, as something specific to the place, inseparable from it, part of what makes the Mediterranean not just a body of water, but a theater. And the Mediterranean has always been a theater. Every great naval power in history has understood that control of this sea, this inland corridor between Europe and Africa, between the Atlantic and the Suez, between the Western world and everything east of it, is not optional for any nation that takes maritime power seriously. Russia takes maritime power seriously, and Russia's access to the Mediterranean, routed through the Black Sea and the Turkish Straits, has always been strategically constrained, politically contested, and operationally precious. The Russian Navy's presence in the Mediterranean, centered on its naval facility at Tartus on the Syrian coast, the only Russian naval base on the Mediterranean littoral, is not large by the standard of what the Sixth Fleet routinely deploys to these waters, but it is persistent. And in the years following the accelerated deterioration of the security relationship between Moscow and NATO, that persistence had taken on a sharper edge. It was a Monday. The time was 17:08 local. The afternoon light was doing exactly what Mediterranean light does in late spring, making the world look deceptively peaceful. A United States Navy carrier strike group was operating approximately 200 nautical miles west-northwest of Crete, conducting joint exercises with Greek and Italian naval assets as part of a scheduled NATO maritime interoperability event. The carrier's flight deck had been active since morning, running a cycle of FA-18 Super Hornets and EA-18G Growlers through a series of air combat maneuvering and electronic warfare training scenarios that had kept the air wing busy and sharp. The surface group, cruiser, 2 destroyers, a fast combat support ship, was arranged in the standard screening formation. The day had the quality of professional routine applied to a demanding environment. That quality changed at 1711. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft, orbiting at 23,000 feet, approximately 100 miles north of the strike group, detected the contacts first. Not surface contacts, air contacts. Specifically, multiple large airborne tracks emerging from the direction of the Black Sea coast, crossing the Turkish coast at altitude, descending toward the Mediterranean at a speed and profile consistent with heavy strike aircraft operating at long range. The E-2D's radar system, capable of tracking hundreds of contacts simultaneously at ranges far exceeding any ship-based system, built the picture in seconds. 4 contacts, then 6. Then, as the tracks resolved more completely, 8. Flying in a loose combat spread, altitude descending through 22,000 feet, speed approximately 850 kilometers per hour. Course southwest, directly toward the carrier strike group. The E-2D controller's voice came across the tactical frequency with the precision and composure of someone who has trained for exactly this moment and is now executing the procedure she has rehearsed. Strike Group Eagle, air picture update. 8 contacts, bearing 042, range 260 miles, altitude flight level 220 and descending, speed 850. Classification in progress. Stand by. In the carrier's Combat Information Center, the air picture updated on every display simultaneously. 8 large airborne contacts, 260 miles northeast, closing at 850 kilometers per hour. At that speed and range, they were approximately 18 minutes from the outer boundary of the strike group's standard air defense envelope. The watch team ran the classification in parallel with the E-2D's own analysis, comparing radar cross-sections, speed profiles, formation geometry, known track patterns from the library of previously cataloged Russian aviation activity in this region. The classification came back at 1714. Tupolev Tu-22M3, 8 of them. The Tu-22M3, NATO reporting name Backfire, is a supersonic variable sweep wing bomber with a combat radius of approximately 2,200 kilometers when carrying its standard weapons load. Its primary anti-ship weapon is the Kr-22 cruise missile, a weapon with a range of 600 kilometers, a speed of Mach 4.6, and a warhead sufficient to mission kill a carrier with a single hit. 8 Tu-22M3s, each carrying 2 Kh-22s, represented 16 hypersonic anti-ship missiles, a strike package that, if executed at maximum range, would challenge any ship-based air defense system in the world. This was not a reconnaissance aircraft. This was not a maritime patrol flight. This was a bomber formation, inbound on a bearing that pointed directly at the center of the strike group, at a speed that would bring them within Kh-22 launch range in less than 12 minutes. The captain arrived in the CIC at 17:15. He had been on the bridge when the E-2D's initial report came through and had moved immediately. He looked at the air picture for 10 seconds, taking in the contact count, the bearing, the speed, the classification. And then he looked at the air warfare coordinator. Alert status: Alert 5 Super Hornets are manned and ready, sir. Alert 15 is in the ready room. E-2D has the contacts locked. Bring the Alert 5 to engines turning. I want them ready to launch on my order. Do not launch yet. He turned to the electronic warfare officer. What are the EA-18S doing right now? 2 Growlers airborne, sir. Standard EW patrol posture. I can reposition them to the northeast, bearing within 4 minutes. Do it. Quietly. I don't want any changes to our radar emissions yet. I want to watch what these aircraft do before we tell them what we know. The discipline of information control in a developing air threat scenario is one of the most demanding aspects of carrier air defense. The instinct is to light everything up, to activate every radar, to launch every alert aircraft, to declare your full capability immediately. That instinct is wrong. Every radar emission tells the incoming aircraft what you have and where you are. Every launch pattern reveals your defensive geometry. The decision of when to show your hand and how much of it to show is the central judgment call of the air warfare coordinator's professional life. The captain had made that judgment. Watch first, reveal later. On his terms, not theirs. At 17:17, The ESM suite picked up the first active radar emissions from the incoming formation. The Tu-22M3S had activated their PNA radar systems, the maritime search and targeting radar that the Backfire uses to build its attack picture. The ESM system classified the emissions within 40 seconds and confirmed active PNA, 8 sources, bearing consistent with the contacts. The Russian crews were searching. They were building their targeting solution. They had not yet achieved a lock on the carrier. The strike group's emissions control posture was limiting the returns they were getting. But they were working toward one. At sea, distance is language. And the Tu-22M3's PNA radar was speaking a language that everyone in the CIC understood perfectly. "Log the emissions," the captain said. "Time, frequency, bearing, intensity, everything." He looked at the communications officer. "NATO red switch. Get me the air component commander." The conversation with the air component commander, the NATO officer responsible for coordinating Allied air operations in the region, lasted 90 seconds. It was efficient, precise, and produced one key output: 2 Italian Air Force F-35. As operating on a training mission over the Tyrrhenian Sea, were diverted northeast and placed under tactical control of the carrier's E-2D. They would take a position on the northern flank of the developing intercept geometry, invisible to the Russian crews on their current radar sweep, a capability that existed and was positioned and would be relevant if the situation continued to develop. The carrier's own alert aircraft remained on deck, engines turning, not launched. At 17:19, the Tu-22M3 formation made its first significant maneuver. The 8 aircraft, which had been flying in a loose combat spread, compressed into a tighter formation and descended through 15,000 feet, a profile consistent with a pre-attack altitude adjustment. In a real strike scenario, bombers descending at this point in the approach would be preparing to execute a coordinated launch sequence. Multiple aircraft releasing missiles simultaneously from different bearings to saturate the target's defenses. In this scenario, the maneuver was almost certainly designed to demonstrate that the Russian crews knew the strike profile and were executing it step by step to see what reaction it produced. In the CIC, the Air Warfare Coordinator updated the threat assessment and reported the new altitude and formation profile to the captain. The tone of the report was even, factual. The numbers said what they said. Time to KH-22 maximum launch range at current speed? The captain asked. 7 minutes, sir. 7 minutes at current closure rate. In 7 minutes, the Tu-22M3 formation would be within the maximum published range of the KH-22 missile. Within 7 minutes, if this were a real attack, the carrier's defensive systems would need to be fully engaged, and every asset in the strike group would be executing the coordinated anti-air warfare response that they trained for constantly and hoped to never need in actual combat. The captain looked at the display for a long moment. He looked at the 8 contact icons, their speed vectors pointing southwest, their altitude dropping, their formation tightening. He looked at the EA-18G Growlers repositioning silently to the northeast. He looked at the Italian F-35s, invisible on the Russian PNA radar, holding their position on the northern flank. He looked at the alert Super Hornets, engines running, pilots in cockpits, waiting for the launch order that had not come yet. The geometry tightens. Launch the Alert 5, he said. 2 aircraft, standard intercept profile. They are to identify, maintain visual contact, and escort. They are not to activate fire control radar unless I give a direct order. They are to be professional and visible, nothing else. The 2 FA-18F Super Hornets launched within 90 seconds, climbing into the late afternoon Mediterranean light and turning northeast at full military power. In the CIC, their transponder icons appeared on the display. Blue friendly tracks, moving fast, climbing through 10,000 feet toward the intercept bearing. In the E-2D, the controller was already threading their vectors, putting them on an intercept course that would bring them alongside the Russian formation at a geometry designed to communicate presence without aggression. At 1724, the 2 Super Hornets made visual contact with the lead Tu-22M. The intercept geometry had worked precisely. The F/A-18S appeared off the Russian formation's port side at approximately 1 mile, matching speed and altitude, close enough to be unambiguous, but far enough to be non-threatening. The lead Backfires crew would have seen them clearly. They would have known they were F/A-18F Super Hornets. They would have known those aircraft had carried out the intercept with a precision that indicated they had been tracked, guided, and vectored from a system that had known exactly where the Russian aircraft were at every point for the entire approach. Simultaneously, the EA-18G Growlers activated their ALQ-99 jamming systems in a targeted, narrow-band mode that flooded the specific frequencies of the Tu-22M3's PNA radar with structured interference. Not a blanket jam, but a precise, surgical disruption designed to tell the Russian crews that their radar picture had just become unreliable. The ESM data those crews were depending on to build their targeting solution had been compromised. Not destroyed, compromised. The distinction mattered. A destroyed radar tells you nothing. A compromised radar tells you that someone with very specific knowledge of your systems and your frequencies has decided at this precise moment to demonstrate that knowledge. On the tactical radio frequency, the carrier's communications officer transmitted a message in English on the military aviation emergency frequency that all aircraft in the theater monitored. Russian military aircraft. This is a United States Navy carrier strike group operating in international airspace and waters. You are approaching on a bearing and profile consistent with a simulated attack approach. You have been intercepted by United States naval aviation. Your radar systems are experiencing interference. All your positions and emissions have been tracked and recorded since your departure from the Black Sea coast. We are conducting lawful operations in international waters and airspace. We recommend you alter course and exit the area. The transmission was factual. Every single word of it was true. And the Russian crews, listening to that transmission while looking out their cockpit windows at 2 Super Hornets sitting off their port wing at 1 mile, and watching their PNA displays dissolve into structured noise, understood that it was true. At 1727, 4 minutes before the formation would have reached KH-22 maximum launch range, the lead Tu-22M began a turn. The aircraft rolled left, north-northeast, and the rest of the formation followed in sequence, each aircraft banking away from the carrier's bearing and climbing back through 15,000 feet toward the altitude where long-range cruise typically occurs. The tight attack formation opened back into the loose combat spread they had maintained during the initial approach. The PNA radars went quiet as the ESM suite confirmed. The Russian crews had switched off their targeting systems. They were leaving. In the CIC, the Air Warfare Coordinator reported the course reversal in the same even tone he had used throughout the entire event. The watch team logged the time, the bearing of the turn, the speed. The E-2D controller tracked the departing contacts as they climbed back toward the 20,000 feet and accelerated northeast, their track vectors now pointing away from the strike group and back toward the Black Sea coast. The two Super Hornets maintained their escort position alongside the lead Tu-22M for another 6 minutes, staying with the Russian aircraft as they departed, visible and professional, communicating through their mere presence that the intercept was complete and documented, and that the American crews had nothing left to prove. Then, at 17:33, the intercept lead transmitted a single line on the tactical frequency. Eagle, Viper flight. Contacts are aggressing northeast, breaking off escort. RTB, Viper flight Eagle. Copies, good intercept. 4 words. The assessment of a 12-minute air intercept operation that had involved an E-2D, 2 Super Hornets, 2 EA-18G Growlers, 2 Italian F-35AS held in reserve, a carrier strike group in full air defense readiness, and a NATO air component commander on the command net. Good intercept. The economy of the language was the point. Nothing about this had been dramatic in the way that drama is usually performed. It had been efficient, layered, precisely coordinated, and completely effective. The captain stood at the air picture display until the last Russian contact dropped off the E-2D's tracking display, receding into the airspace northeast of the Turkish coast. Then he looked at the Air Warfare Coordinator. Full reconstruction, time of initial detection, ESM capture of PNA activation, intercept timeline, jamming employment, all communication logs. I want the package to 6th Fleet and Air Component Command within 90 minutes. Include the Italian F-35 tasking. They held their position correctly. He looked at the communications officer. Send a signal to the E-2D crew. They had the picture before anyone. Good work. He left the CIC at 17:41, 30 minutes after the Tu-22M formation had appeared on the E-2D's radar as 8 anonymous blips approaching from the northeast. The carrier's flight deck resumed its scheduled afternoon operations cycle. The Mediterranean light had shifted from gold to orange as the sun dropped towards the horizon, painting the surface of the sea in colors that had no military significance whatsoever, and were, for precisely that reason, worth noticing. What had unfolded in those 30 minutes was an encounter that would be analyzed at 6th Fleet at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe and in the classified aviation threat assessments prepared for every carrier operating in the Mediterranean theater for the next 3 years. The Russian bomber approach was not new. The Tu-22M had been used to probe and pressure NATO naval forces in the Mediterranean for decades. What was new, or rather, what was continuously refined and continuously demonstrated, was the depth and completeness of the awareness that NATO brought to those probes. 8 aircraft detected at 260 miles. Classified, within 3 minutes. Intercepted precisely. Jammed surgically. And throughout the entire sequence, the strike group had maintained its flight operations schedule without alteration, without panic, without any visible sign that anything unusual was occurring. That invisibility, the ability to respond to a major air threat with complete competence while appearing entirely undisturbed, is itself a strategic communication. It says, "This is routine for us. You are not a surprise. You have never been a surprise. We have been watching you since the Black Sea." Modern naval supremacy in contested airspace is not about who has the most missiles or the fastest aircraft. It is about who sees first, who thinks clearest, and who has built the institutional framework, the doctrine, the training, the command relationships, the electronic warfare capability. To turn that awareness into a controlled, proportionate, utterly professional response that leaves the adversary with nothing to show for the attempt and no room to misrepresent what happened. The Mediterranean light faded. The evening watch took the CIC. The E-2D orbited north of the carrier, its radar spinning, watching everything. It always is,